Welcome to Avant-garde Entrepreneur. I am so glad you're here today with me, my friend. I am so excited to share the air with a legend of social enterprise, Amanda Kiessel. If you don't know her, you likely know her name or you'll recognize her face if you're watching this on YouTube. Amanda is the co-creator of Good Market. It's a digital commons for our global changemakers to be seen and to connect and to support each other. And she's also a board member of the Social Enterprise World Forum, which many of you know. I've met lots of you there. She's an Ashoka Fellow and a board member of BiSocial USA. In my opinion, Amanda is just a wonderful human. She downplays herself, her roles, and her influence, which is perhaps why she's so effective and influential. And as you know, I'm a huge advocate for the role of social enterprise in creating sustainable economic development in the communities in which you operate. And like you, Amanda has gone beyond the talking to the doing. And she is empowering and encouraging social entrepreneurs to keep going. What's even more interesting is that Amanda has a really rare access beyond to a broad range of people beyond what many of us do. She's friends and has colleagues that are in business owners, that are nonprofit leaders, that are in the academic space, and also community leaders, both formal and informal. And this blend of people, I feel like, really gives Amanda a unique knowledge and experience that we can all learn from. And I feel very fortunate for us to get to share some time with her today. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Tricia. What an incredible introduction.
Well, it's all you, not me. So, Amanda, tell us about your where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What was your early career like?
I grew up in northern Michigan, and I'm from a farming family. So cherry trees on one side of the family and Christmas trees on the other side of the family. I did school, undergrad and master's on the East Coast of the U.S. I grew up in the middle, did undergrad and master's on the East Coast. I ended up doing a PhD on the West Coast. So a little bit of, exploring different parts of the U.S., but I spent most of my early career, all of my early career, based out of Asia. So I spent 2 years in Thailand, and then I went to Sri Lanka planning to spend 8 months, and I spent 18 years there.
Wow.
Yeah, so when I arrived in Sri Lanka, they had just signed a ceasefire that at the time seemed really positive, that there was a real energy in the air. And there was an organization, a local Sri Lankan organization that I was working with. And they've been working in the war-affected areas. And they had been getting international funding. And that funding, now the war had stopped, they expected the funding to stop. And they wanted to keep doing the work in all the communities they worked with. So they were trying to figure out how can we be self-sustaining. So it was social enterprise work, but I don't think we were using the word back then. And that's why I ended up staying on. So that was the main reason for being there. And then there was a tsunami in Sri Lanka and in the Indian Ocean. And the war started again. And so I ended up getting exposed to, in some ways, some of the worst parts of the international aid sector. And that's kind of the roots of the work that I'm doing now. But that was very much, that had a huge influence on me.
It's amazing. You are not the first person I've heard who has fallen in love with Sri Lanka from all over the world. It's amazing. Amazing. And to be there at such a time and to see the extremes, really, I can imagine how it shaped where you are today and your perspective.
Incredibly resilient communities and people just doing amazing work. Amazing.
I know that the term social entrepreneurship or social enterprise is relatively new compared to how long the work in this style of work has been going on. And Good Market, one of the organizations that you're a co-creator of, has been around for quite a while doing some amazing things. Can you tell us about what the spark was to begin Good Market?
So while the war was going on in Sri Lanka, there a lot of the day-to-day work was dealing with emergency situations. So it was relief and, helping people with resettlement and just getting people started again with their lives. And of course, these were all communities I'd known for many years and deeply cared about and wanted to be doing that work. But my interest was things that were more about long-term change. So anytime there was a chance, if there was a trip, related to my work in another country or anything, I would go and visit groups that had self-sustaining models using all different names, right? So including in Sri Lanka, the parts of the country that weren't as affected as much by the war, there would still be fair trade or organic groups, things that had some kind of model that would let them be self-sustainable. They weren't dependent on the donor funding. And then if there were any chances, to friends in Thailand or Myanmar, India or Solomon Islands, or if there was a trip to the US, it was always about who can I visit, who's doing this work, and that would give me a lot of energy going back. And so I think a big breakthrough came on a trip to Japan because it started becoming more clear how big our movement was, right? So we weren't seeing it as a movement yet because it's fragmented. It's come up, bottom up. People are working in different sectors. They use different language. I mean, in some cases, not just terminology, but really different languages. They're registered in different ways. They could be co-ops or nonprofits or, nowadays B Corps, different structures. And we're certified in different ways, different communities. And in Japan, if you were trying to look online and you don't speak Japanese, I don't, it was really hard to find, okay, well, who could I visit on this trip? And so I started asking people that I did have connections with, who else would you recommend? And it just became so clear that we all know each other, right? So it might not be fully visible outwardly, but we're connected. We have relationships. Because if you're doing this work, you want to work with others that have shared values, right? So the idea with Good Market was really about how can we make this movement of people that are prioritizing people and planet and their work, putting that above profit and trying to actually make a difference. How can we make it more visible? And how can we make it easier for all of us to find and connect with each other? So that's the backstory. That was kind of the spark. Yeah. And also just because I kept learning so much from all these incredible groups that I would go and visit. So I was wanting others to have that opportunity to see that it can feel so overwhelming, the issues that we're working on. Mm-hmm. And once you realize how many others are out there doing this work, it helps. It really helps.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does. And I have to tell everyone, I am a proud member of Good Market. Yes. And I have to say something that is pretty interesting. I think it's interesting. I actually told you, Amanda, I'm not sure if I'm going to get in because what's amazing, and we'll talk more about this, but I do encourage all of you to go on and check out Good Market. We'll link to it in the show notes. But Amanda, what I love how the team has created all the criteria, I wouldn't call it criteria, all the questions about in all the different areas of people and planet. And it was really a great check for me as I was going through and answering the questions of did I do this or did I do that? It was fantastic for me to go through. Well, I did have a little shame because there were several things that I wasn't doing. But it really opened my eyes to, wow, it's amazing how many factors you and the team have brought together, how many things that we can do, and the steps that we can take, not just in our interactions with our team, but also on the back end, how we live our lives, how we run our offices, and that kind of thing. And I think it's amazing how that's come together.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want anyone to have shame feeling it. Because the thing is, we all, this is really challenging work, right? And we all have an entry point, and then from there we keep trying to improve. We make the road by walking, right? Yes. So the idea is, and we tell everybody who fills the form, use it to share your story and your purpose. And if a question doesn't apply, select no. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And the thing that's been fun is that people afterwards will say, because a form sounds pretty boring, right? Mm-hmm. But we've had a lot of people afterwards say, oh, it was actually really helpful because it got me thinking about things I might want to do in the future to improve.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have to throw in here, this isn't something developed by, a team. This belongs to the community. These are community-owned standards. The form that you're seeing, that came from, we'll maybe get to this in a minute, but we did in-person meetings for 4 years, every week, using paper applications. And that's where all of this came from. So this has all been, this is owned, it's a shared resource. It's a commons. It's owned by everybody. So this has been a group process, and people suggest, they're like, oh, I see this is actually missing, or actually this doesn't work in my context. And so we're constantly finding ways to improve it based on everyone's feedback.
That's wonderful. I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I know the term digital commons, but I hadn't put that all together. Well, on that note, can you share a little bit about how, I think you're up to over 3,200 organizations, socially responsible organizations now. Can you talk about how, or, kind of what the evolution was from, those in-person meetings, or where you're Google searching, trying to find businesses in Japan, to where it is now, to this amazing global network?
So a big part of it was because we call them stewards, kind of the co-founders, right? Because we're stewards of the commons. When we were first thinking, okay, this needs to exist in the world, we were all in Sri Lanka and coming out of an experience with aid funding. So we were really concerned. We'd seen a lot of platforms come up that when the project funding is there, everything looks great, and then the money stops and everything stops. And we didn't want that to happen. And we'd also known groups that had taken on impact investment or VC funding and had gotten pulled away from what their original purpose was. So the whole, the really important thing was this needed to belong to the community, and it had to have a self-sustaining model so that it didn't get pulled off those paths, right? So we did what would be called a lean startup approach. We're like, okay, we want to know, does this work? And so we did a weekly in-person marketplace event as a way to check, does these minimum standards, does this process work? Are people going to even be interested? And we did that in Sri Lanka. And we thought it was going to be this tiny thing. We thought maybe 10 stalls. We'll just see, does this work? Is this a way to test it? And it became really popular in a way that we just absolutely did not expect. It is still going on now. So if anyone's traveling to Sri Lanka, make sure you visit. People that we thought we kind of knew who was doing this work, and all of a sudden people started coming out of everywhere, like things we didn't even know were happening in the country, which was just incredible. And so the thought had been, okay, well, we're going to pilot this, and then we're going to develop software. We had international friends that had, wanted it in different countries, and we've been talking to them. We had to tell them, actually, we're going to have to wait on the software because it had gotten to the point where for some people, this was their livelihood. They'd never been able to connect before with people that really cared about the purpose behind, organic farmers that didn't have a way to connect with people who really wanted that, or people doing fair trade projects. So we realized if we just stop, it's going to actually harm some of the groups that are participating. And so it ended up taking about 5 years for it to get to the point where it was actually self-sustaining, and we were able to use those resources to start the software development. And it was a much slower way of doing it. But because of that, by the time we actually started, we knew what people wanted. Our original plan when we first started, we had the designs, and we kind of knew what we thought it was supposed to be. By the time we actually did start, we realized that was wrong. And we'd adjusted to what the community needed. So when the software first started rolling out, we were using it for the activities in Sri Lanka to as the curation process. And we told people it's in beta, we're testing it, it's for Sri Lanka. But we didn't close off applications from other places. And so we started getting applications from other parts of the world, which was a big surprise. And it was mostly places where I think people didn't feel connected into having a community yet. So a good example, I'll stop here, but a good example was, we got an application where we had a pin was dropped. We have a map that you put where you are, and it was in the middle of the ocean. And we had a lot of the people using it were not English speakers, weren't comfortable on computers. And we thought, oh, okay, they made a mistake. They dropped the pin in the ocean. And it turned out that they were from the island of Cocreator in Micronesia.
Oh,
And
wow.
they were doing vegan banana fiber wallets. And they were really just in a little dot in the middle of the ocean. And so there were a lot of kind of early surprises like that. Yeah. And you asked about just how it ended up growing. And that's been completely through, it's designed to support communities and networks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe another topic, but it's set up to support the people who bring everyone together, the connectors. And so a lot of the outreach happens through that. Once a network is on in a certain area, they're often using it for something and they're bringing their own community members on. Mm-hmm. So we still get people who find it and sign up on their own, but a lot of the outreach happens through networks, which is so much fun.
So much fun. And isn't it how so much social enterprise or impact business is? You start with the heart to meet a need, and then you find out that the need that you thought it's a little different, and you just adapt and adjust, and here you are. Absolutely. All these years later. It's amazing. So how do you, I know that you know a lot of different people and you've had a lot of exposure to the world and different types of people and organizations. How do you explain social enterprise or the concept of socially responsible business to someone who is outside of social enterprise?
Yeah. So I would say that it's businesses that put people and planet first, right? And it's taken a bit to come to that a short way of saying it. Before I say anything more about that, I want to say that Good Market's actually a little bit bigger than that, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Intentionally, it's there are a lot of groups on there that would self-identify as a social enterprise, mm-hmm. but there are also volunteer groups or mutual aid groups that maybe don't have a revenue model, or there's nonprofits that are trying to be self-sustaining, or there's responsible businesses that are trying to figure out how to protect their structure over time. Mm-hmm. So it's a bigger tent. And yes. Then within that, so I wouldn't say that all the groups on there would be social enterprises, but on that, there are many. And so that process of saying, it's groups that put people and planet first, mm-hmm. that's actually been a bottom-up thing over the last several years. Mm-hmm. There were so many definitions, all different parts of the world. And then a process of those groups starting to talk to each other and what are the shared values, what are the common principles. And so over time, it's there's a few principles that came out as these are core to all of us. And this is the way that we describe what we're doing, right? So that they have a purpose, they have a revenue model, right? They reinvest towards their purpose. They have a structure that protects their purpose.
That's so helpful. I like that too. So first of all, I love the simplicity, businesses that put people and planet first. And then the part about having a revenue model and a structure that protects their purpose. That's huge. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Amanda, because even I struggle to explain what social enterprise is, especially when there are so many different names for it. And a lot of people just consider it, it's just business. It's just how I do business. One of these days, maybe the world, will start moving that direction, but
that's the
challenging.
Goal.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us have a challenge just in helping people understand what we do, especially for people who are growing up in what I call up-and-coming communities where there's a lot of pressure to provide for the family and the generations above and in the younger generations. Can be very difficult for people to explain what they're doing or why they're doing it that way, why they're doing business this way. So thank you for sharing that. So when we talk about sustainable economic development, I don't want to get too academic. I feel like I say this so much, so it just sounds so normal to me, but it's probably really not. When we talk about achieving the sustainable economic development goals, a lot of people are really rallied around that. And not necessarily in terms of results, the things that we can't control, but in terms of our efforts as individuals and, the places where we have autonomy. How do you feel like we are doing collectively in terms of achieving the goals?
So I think the intention behind is fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. That there's been dialogue and, this consensus building process. The challenge we have is it's not addressing the root cause of the problem, right? Mm-hmm. It's looking at the symptoms of the problem. And even baked into how the goals work is kind of assuming that we're maintaining business as usual. We're maintaining the current economic system and the model of growth and all of that. And the challenge with that is our current system has some inequalities baked into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to how we're doing, the root cause of a lot of the issues we're dealing with is we've come up with a story that the purpose of business is to maximize profits for private shareholders, right? And that those profits need to grow exponentially, continuously, no matter what happens to people and planet. And that's how the incentive structures currently work. It's a story that we humans came up with, right? And that's not really serving us very well at the moment. And as long as we're working according to that story, and we're using just a tiny bit of that surplus to do projects and programs to treat the symptoms that are coming out of that, we're not going to be able to make the progress we really want to make, right? We might all be doing good work individually, and there might be individuals that benefit, but it's not actually addressing the root of the problem. So I think the thing that I'm seeing that's really exciting right now is you have a lot of people that are kind of starting to realize that, right? Like, this story isn't actually really working for us. And they're realizing that what they're doing with their own work is they're creating the new story, right? It's not like we have to be overwhelmed by this. We're already starting to work in a different way. Right? When we, in our own work, when we have a self-sustaining model, and when we're doing work that's trying to solve social and environmental problems and putting people in platforms, we're showing that there's a different way of doing business, right? And so I think the thing around achieving the SDGs, it becomes about how can we collaborate? How can we speed this up? How can we make this more visible so that all of us together are helping people see a vision for how we could be and help create a new story and the new rules, right? So I think sometimes framing it as the SDGs is a great entry point. It can help people see what the different challenges are and how they're interconnected. But if we're going to really be serious about reaching those goals, right, we have to think about it a little bit differently. We have to understand that what we're dealing with is something systemic. There's injustices built in, and we're going to have to work together to deal with that. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's interesting that they're designed, the SDGs are designed to address systemic issues, but yet there are systemic issues within the system in which we're operating. So
that's right. That's right.
And I think that's what makes Good Market and the community so powerful. Whenever you have more and more organizations coming together and making this as just the normal way that we do business, then it's going to have a trickle out effect. Yeah. Hopefully, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. And then the real goal then is to make it as easy as possible for people to get involved. Right?
Yeah.
It's making it accessible, because I think a lot of people out there, no matter what their background is or what community they're part of, they want to live in a world that's fair and that's good for everybody and that's good for the environment. And so we want to make it easy for people to feel connected to that, to be part of that.
I think that's also valuable too for people to understand when they're sharing their story. This is the story of their social enterprise. We talk about the importance of protecting your beneficiaries above all, because if you don't have beneficiaries, you don't really have a social enterprise as far as the people that are on your team. But to be able to find ways to share what's happening in social enterprise and maybe in general in the lives of the people within the business is really important, to be able to do that tastefully and tactfully and to make that more of a normal thing.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the minimum standards, right, for being on Good Market, is we want people to talk about in your work, how are you prioritizing people and planet? What social and environmental issues? Because every time we talk about that, we're shifting the story.
Yeah.
So communicating about why you do it the way you do it is really important. And that's part of the change.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk a lot about the importance, or at least I talk within my little group about the importance of building a social enterprise that's impactful for the beneficiaries, for the trainees, for the staff, for whoever we are serving. But it's also got to be personally sustainable for the entrepreneur. And you see a lot of social entrepreneurs and change makers. So from a business perspective, what are, let's say, maybe 3 qualities or factors of social enterprises that are sustainable beyond just this current leadership versus those that are not?
So I would say the first thing, because even when we're talking about getting sustainable beyond the current leadership, there's a big push at the beginning that's on the shoulders of relatively few of the people that are kind of the catalyst behind getting a social enterprise going, whether that's a founder or a cooperative, a group of founders, whatever it is. And I think one of the first things for that is making sure that you're working on something you're really passionate about, right? Because it is going to be hard at the beginning. So I'd say the first thing is making sure that you want to wake up in the morning and this is what you're thinking about. This is what you care about. It's that they talk about it like a Venn diagram, the circles, and there's a sweet spot at the middle, right? Where it's like what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you care, and then what you love. And that what you love piece, I think, is really key.
It needs to be big.
Yes. To be able to wake up every morning and still be excited about that. And also at that stage, at the earlier stages, the community bit is probably having a support system and having community, I would say, is probably one of the most important things. So whether that's co-founders or like the coaching and mentoring work that you do, or finding a peer group or finding networks, things like that, that's critical, because there are just going to be days where things feel hard and you need to have other people to talk to.
Yeah.
Right. And then getting it to be sustainable beyond that point, that's the structure thing that I brought up earlier, right? There's a risk, and I don't think we talk about it enough, that you have to be aware of when you're taking on funding, right? You have to make sure that you are taking on funding that is going to allow you to continue working towards your mission. I have seen it's painful when you see a social enterprise with just incredible, all the other purpose, and they're well connected and they're doing great work. And then they take on funding that pushes them towards, maximizing profits, and it pulls them away from their original mission. So making sure that both, in your structure, you're protecting your purpose, and you're taking on financing that's really aligned with your core values and is going to allow you to continue towards your purpose. So those would be the things that I would say, like making sure you love what you're doing, you're well connected, and you've got a structure and financing that protect your purpose. I'm sure there's lots of others, but those are
those are 3 really important ones, and especially coming from you, because you see so many and so many people who are in the change-making space. So this is really valuable, really valuable. Whenever we talk about with social entrepreneurs kind of on the personally sustainable side, it's so easy to get bogged down in the tasks. No matter how altruistic the cause is, we all have a never-ending to-do list and having emergencies. And it's interesting that the most listened to podcast episodes of all time are overcoming overwhelm and goal setting. So we are setting goals, and then we're overwhelming ourselves by the lifestyle. And it doesn't matter how great our purpose is, we're still overwhelmed. So what would be your advice for change makers to help them prevent burnout so that they can stay out there longer, making our world better?
I mean, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's community, right? It's making sure that you've got some kind of support system. It could be a co-founder. It could just be other people that you can really talk to about it when you're having a rough time, coaches, mentors, that kind of thing. That having networks that you're a part of, so you feel like you've got others that are also crazy, that helps.
Yeah.
And even if you haven't found that yet, the knowing that you're not alone, right?
Yes.
Knowing that even when it feels like it, like you've got all this weight on your shoulders and you feel like you're alone, knowing how many others are out there kind of pushing in the same direction. I find that helps a lot, right? It kind of gives an energy. And also just knowing when you need to take a break. Right? For me personally, being outdoors, being in nature is kind of my way when I'm feeling overwhelmed. If I start getting that feeling in a heavy way, it's like, oh, it's time to go outdoors. Different people have different things for that. But for me, that's what it is. It's whether that's ocean, or I'm currently in the desert or wherever, just that's what works for me. But finding that when do you need to just step away from, the computer or the meetings or whatever it is? And it's like, okay, I need a break right now. I need a good night of sleep.
Yes. It's amazing what a good night of sleep will do.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you feel this way too. When it comes to taking a rest or taking a break, for so long I felt this pressure to just either drive, just stay in it, or I felt like I just want to finish this, or there were a million reasons to keep going. But I'm to the point now where I can kind of feel it when I need to take a break. Is that something? Do you have that? Does that come from you to you over time?
I'm not always good at it. Sometimes I go past the point where I probably should have taken a break. But I think it's a practice, right? It's one of those things. It's an ongoing practice of kind of checking in with yourself. How am I doing? All of that. And I think one of the things that helps, part of the reason it's hard for us to take a break is because we know how big these challenges are. We know what we're up against, right? And so it can feel like, oh my goodness, you see all the news and all these things are happening. And so you feel this, because you care, you feel this deep sense of urgency, which can make it hard to take a break. And for me, one of the things that really helps, learning to check in, having that practice, but also just remembering you're not alone. You're not alone. Lots of other people out there working on these problems. We've all got each other, right? The support system. And so if I need to take a break and breathe, I know that I'm not alone and there's others still pushing, and I'll get back in there once I have more energy. It helps. It helps. It doesn't feel like it's all on your shoulders anymore.
Yeah. Giving yourself permission to rest. Super important, just to take a break. So there are so many people within Good Market. Social Enterprise World Forum is huge. There are other organizations out there. Amanda, what are your tips for growing? We could call it your network, but I kind of feel more like it's your personal ecosystem. The people that are high quality in your life versus the quantity of noise. The quantity is easy, but when it comes to building people around you that really make you feel safe, valuable, loved, normal, what are your tips for people to develop their personal ecosystem?
I think there's a bit of it. This is a funny way of putting it, but there's almost a shopping around element that needs to happen, right? There are so many support groups or networks or things that are out there, and there's never going to be one that's just right for everybody. You got to find what's really a good fit for you. I found groups that have more of a spiritual basis, or groups that are, they're very action oriented. Or they want to talk about the deep structural issues, or some people just want to talk about the goals or what I'm doing today, productivity and things. You've got to find, and maybe there's more than one. Maybe you have different networks that serve different needs for you, but really starting to be tuned into if you're trying to find that kind of connection and it's draining you, that's the time to be like, okay, I think I need to step away from that one and look for other opportunities. And that's okay, right? And I think for certain people, having in-person really matters. Having somebody that you can, meet up with over a coffee or a tea, chai or whatever. And that is what really gives them energy, is that face-to-face connection. In that case, if you can't find something that's already out there, try to pull together a few people yourself, right? It doesn't have to be formal or registered or some kind of a big network. But again, it's again that practice of checking in with yourself. When you're engaging with a group, or you found somebody, it's like, is this really giving me energy, or is this making everything harder? And if it's making everything harder, it's okay to step away, right?
Amanda, that is brilliant advice, because we do get so we need to trying to make this work, and you feel like, well, this person came into my life, maybe they're there for a reason, but it is so important to check in and think, how am I feeling about this? How is my energy level?
That's right. There's certain groups. Part of doing this work, especially when you're trying to actually shift things, is sometimes you do have to work with people that aren't always fun to work with.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's part of it. But you just have to make sure that you've got that balanced with a core group around you that does give you energy. Yes. That you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is my tribe. I feel safe. I can actually talk about all the stress and all the things I'm dealing with, and we can have a real, do you know what I mean? A real sense of connection and get that energy.
Well, speaking of energy, how do you recharge? Yeah, let's talk about that. There's something that I always like to ask people, because when everyone is different, and when we're, out there a lot and dealing with such heavy issues, it's so important for us to recharge. So I would love to know how you take care of yourself.
I mentioned a little bit. So for me, the biggest thing is time in nature, being outdoors. I found that it actually has to be some kind of movement, right? So like being on trails, or if I'm on a beach, walking, something where I'm moving in nature somehow just settles things back down. I have a personal meditation practice as well. Different people have different forms of spirituality in their life, so that helps. And for me, again, I've kind of mentioned this, but anything to reconnect with how many other people are out there doing this. So if I'm having a hard time, if you get a news overdose and it all just feels so overwhelming, I will go and check in on what different groups are doing. And I'm like, okay. There's others out there. So I'd say those are my main strategies. It's moving, being in nature, and connecting with others that are doing this work. That's what helps me.
It's great.
It's different for everybody.
Yeah. And it's something that all of us can do. All of us can do. Even if we live in a city, just getting outside away from your device. If you can leave your phone. Oh my goodness. What? Leave a phone?
Exactly.
If you can just take a walk around the block without a device, it's so important. And I'm a firm believer in that quiet time. And people call it, people do different things in their quiet time, and I call it meditation, but settling your spirit, just getting quiet so that you can hear that internal guidance system.
Exactly. I mean, that's a theme that keeps coming up in our conversation, right? It's checking in with yourself about burnout, checking in with yourself. Do you feel like you're online with your purpose? Checking in, does this community working for me? Do I have a support system? To do that, you have to make space for it.
Yeah.
Right? If every minute is filled with emails and calls and all of that, when are you going to have time to check in? So making sure you got that space for it, where you're not just absorbing content, right? Where you actually have time to process, check in with yourself.
Yeah. So on that note, what is, when it comes to, you're sort of I won't say you are on the front line dealing with some really heavy issues and helping others kind of come along and working with different generations. What is your why? What really keeps you going on the tough days when you're news overloaded and you feel like it's all kind of too big? What keeps you going?
I mean, I think this is true for most people who are doing this work. At the core of it is love, right? You feel a love for the people that you're working with, for humans. You feel love for, the planet and all the different beings on it and how beautiful and incredible it all is. So I think that's, whatever your form of practice is, I think that's often, like, that's the big why. That's at the root of everything. But for me, that kind of maybe an extra layer to that is a sense of the urgency of the time that we happen to be born into. Right? This is one of the first times in human history where we can actually have a global understanding, right? That we understand how we're all interconnected with each other. And how big the challenges are that we're up against. And we have this really tiny window to be able to make a transition to a story that works better for us, right? And works better for all humans, the planet, and everything. That can feel overwhelming, but it can also feel really exciting, right? So the sense of urgency around that is, to me, a big thing that kind of keeps me going. And the concern of being a good ancestor and, leaving things better for future generations. And a good example would be, I remember having a conversation with a young designer, had just come out of design school. So she was early 20s, and she was just like, it's such a great time to be a designer because we have to redesign everything. And I was like, what a great way of thinking about it, right? If your goal is to how do we actually figure out these social environmental problems? It's like, what a great time, because we have to be creative, and there's so many things to work on, and we have to redesign everything. Yeah. So the urgency, the time that we happen to be born into is a big part of my why.
And I like what you said about the urgency can either feel like pressure, or I don't know if you used the term pressure or overwhelm, but it can also feel like excitement.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to that checking in and channeling that energy the way that you want it to go. And that's really important for all of us when we think about how are we going to keep going, because I think many of us, we feel that sense of urgency at times, and it might not be for the bigger picture that you've described, but we have a sense of urgency for, we've got to get this program in place because the kids are starting to grow up, and we've got, we feel this urgency all the time. So using that as excitement versus a sense of pressure, it's really important for people to understand, I think.
That's right. And I think it's particularly important for people who have already taken a step into this work, because they're likely to feel the overwhelm. But I think also for people that are just, seeing the news or seeing an issue they care about, whether they're concerned about plastic pollution, whatever it is, they're concerned about, children in their community, or they're worried about what's happening with the homelessness situation. They see that and they feel this intense sense of this isn't right. And, that, and if you just stop there, right, with that fear can be immobilizing. That can be overwhelming. And when you start realizing, okay, there's others working on this, or what's a small thing I could do, that's when you start having a sense of energy or a sense of creativity. All right, there's others working on this. We're gonna work and figure this out.
It else comes back to community, doesn't it? Where you makes you feel normal. Yeah. So before I ask my last question, Amanda, how do people find you?
So I don't do much with personal social media, because our real role, it's a commons, our role is to amplify the work that others are doing. I am on LinkedIn. Okay. Certainly if somebody, applies on Good Market, I'm there behind the scenes giving support wherever I can. So I am on LinkedIn. So that would probably be the best spot.
So we will put the 2 links in the show notes. We'll put Amanda's LinkedIn, and then we'll also put the Good Market URL so that all of you can hop on there and join. So Amanda, my last question for you, thank you so much for today. What is as you talk about the urgency, and we talked about, social enterprise and kind of what it could be, what is your biggest vision for what social enterprise and socially responsible businesses can have in terms of our global economy?
The big vision. Right? We have a lot of steps along the way, but the big vision is we are the future of business. The future of business. It's not just about a sector or trying to fix the cracks in the current system. It's right now, we have a story that says it's okay for a business to extract and exploit and maximize profit. But those kinds of stories we've seen in human history can change. Right? We had stories that it was okay to own people. Right? We've had stories that the king is the only, they've got divine right, no one else matters. We've had stories in the past in our history as humans where we were like, that story doesn't really work for us anymore. We need to change the story. This is one of those examples, right? So the future story that we're all creating together is that when you're doing this work and you're creating value and providing products and services, you can do it in a way that puts people and planet first. Right? And as we start changing the story, we shift the narrative, it makes it easier to start shifting the rules. Right? So for me, for example, if we're going to be having our government using funds to be able to purchase things, I would like that to happen from groups that are, put people and planet first rather than ones that are going to extract and exploit, right? So we can start changing our rules around procurement. We can start changing, there's the list of things that when we start changing the story, we start changing the norms and the rules, that's to me the future we're heading towards, where we have an economy based on groups that put people and planet first.
I love that. Well, Amanda, you are clearly leading the charge, and I am so grateful for all that you shared with us today. You have so much wisdom, and I'm really grateful that you came on and you shared your heart so authentically and openly with us.
Thanks, Tricia. I'm really grateful for the work you're doing. You're giving people a support system through the podcast and through the other work.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, Amanda, I hope you have a wonderful day. And again, I'm so glad we got to connect. And if there's anything that you see that I can do for you or the Good Market community, please let me know, because I'm happy to do whatever I can.